So, Lila, tell us a little bit about yourself. Or we can go on to Scott.
Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Scott Towsley. I spent a number of years at DHS Science and Technology. I've done a lot of work with NIST, Chris Greer, and many others there. A lot of smart cities work, a lot of critical infrastructure, increasingly a lot of IoT related stuff. So the intersection of IoT and the question of standards is something of particular professional interest to me. Thanks.
All right, bye.
Oh, perfect. Perfect. Danielle?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Danielle Graham. I'm with GSA's information technology category in the IT hardware division. So I appreciate this topic in particular on IoT. And Alison, I know that we've spoken before, and I apologize for being unavailable. I was away on illness, but I'm back. I'm really excited to hear that you're speaking today, and hearing about the great work that you all are doing in NIST, and I know that you've been involved in particularly from the public safety point of view. So have a professional interest in IT hardware and where that's going, kind of the future of this. So really appreciate you being on the program today. So thank you.
Perfect. And Van Goodwin? I see that you just joined. If you want to give a quick introduction.
Yes,
And-
I did. Yes, I did. Hello, sorry, I was having trouble with my other mute button. Yeah, Van Goodwin. So I'm managing director of Van Allen Strategies. So we are a technology infrastructure consulting firm. Primarily have been private sector and actually working with some IoT projects in support of the manufacturing and telemetry and predictive analytics and things like that. We've recently gotten more into the federal sector. So we just had our first federal contracts landed a little over a year ago, and so we're really looking at this to expand some of our expertise into this area.
Well, congratulations. That's great.
Thank you.
Now, Vendra, if you'd like to do a quick introduction, we're just going around sharing our brief background and kind of how we connected today's session.
Thanks, Don. Hi, everyone. My name is Narendra, and I am actually a consultant with GlobeNet, and I'm involved in a number of IEEE activities ranging from smart cities, telehealth, and agriculture as well.
Great. Well, welcome. We're glad to have all of you. One more try, Lila? If not, let me go ahead and introduce our speaker today. We are privileged to have Alison Kahn, who's an electrical engineer with the National Institute of Standards and Technology. She works in the Public Safety Communications Research Office and is coming to us from Boulder, Colorado today. She's been working in advanced public safety communication technologies for a good part of her career. And prior to that, she had some technical connection with some of the cell phone network end-to-end connectivity. So once again, we're very happy you're here to share some information. I'll go ahead and stop the share, and I believe, Alison, you've got some slides to share with us. Probably want to come off mute.
There we go. That'll be a lot better. All right, let me see if I can get these screens shared. Let's see. Do it. It's always PowerPoint's always kind of a pain as far as getting the appropriate things shared. So apologies. How's that? Can you see that?
We can, thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so I kind of gave Don a little change of agenda at the last minute, just because we had a lot of things going on. So there will be some talk about the work that NIST is doing as far as IoT. And then I'm also going to discuss the working group that NIST is heading up that kind of has similar goals as this working group. And so I wanted to just kind of talk to y'all and see if there was any kind of information sharing. So basically, my co-convener of the federal working group was going to be here today, but schedules got kind of crazy. My name is Alison Kahn, and as Don said, I work in the NIST Communications Technology Laboratory as part of the Public Safety Communications Research Group. And prior to this, I did some IoT work with PSCR. I worked a little bit with DHS S&T, Scott, so I'm familiar with your group and the work that they do, and it's been hugely beneficial for us as well. We've also been working a lot in just community outreach, working with the private industry in getting technologies out to public safety professionals and working to kind of enhance their situational awareness and their operations through the use of newer technologies. My co-convener is Katerina Magus, Kat Magus. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with her work as the program manager of the IoT or the cybersecurity for IoT program. They've come out with a lot of special publications regarding best practices for cybersecurity within the IoT realm. So she and I are both working on this federal working group, which I'll go into a little more detail on in a few slides. But I wanted to start by talking about a few of the programs that NIST has ongoing, and I'm sure that you're familiar with the majority of them. You already mentioned, I believe, GCTC or some of the other programs that are ongoing. As part of, we've recently acquired the Smart Connected Systems group within the Communications Technology Lab. And one of the big programs that's going on within the Smart Connected Systems group is the Smart Grid Framework and Interoperability Program. And their goal is to work alongside DOE and private companies within industry to develop guidance and to develop best practices for utilization of the smart grid. So they're looking for how to develop best practices for this emerging, highly distributed grid architecture, to develop better measurement science methodologies to increase the efficiency and reliability of the grid, and to work on securing the grid alongside DOE and FERC and OSTP to determine how the grid needs to be regulated, how it needs to be secured, how it needs to be operated. So there's a lot of collaboration between NIST and other agencies going on with this work. Another example of IoT work being done by NIST. This is more kind of externally collaborative work. This is some of the public safety work that we've been doing alongside NTIA FirstNet, as well as the Economic Development Administration. The R2 network is basically a portal that connects public safety entities with first responders and technology innovators. And it allows public safety not only the ability to see what technologies are out there, but it allows vendors who are in earlier stages of technological readiness to demonstrate these products to public safety, so they can actually get the products in their hands early, allow them to try them out before maybe they're commercially available, which allows them to not only better address specific use cases for public safety, but also allows them to kind of increase the trust in the systems early on, which is a huge concern for a lot of industries as far as whether the intended market actually, can trust and engage with the product prior to using it full scale. So this is a kind of cool collaborative effort that we have to kind of get technologies out to the public safety market, which is kind of my realm. Then again, Kat's area of expertise in her program is the Cybersecurity for IoT program, which develops frameworks and best practices in a variety of entities across the IoT spectrum. They have the NIST IR 8259 series for manufacturers of IoT products, which provides guidance on how they can create security within those IoT products. For federal agencies, they have the 800-213 series, which kind of dictates which devices can be utilized within the federal government for security concerns, making sure that they have the appropriate levels of security within the government. And then for consumer IoT products, the group recently did a response to EO 14028, which provides guidance on labeling of IoT products with respect to cybersecurity capabilities and ensuring that the general public understands the level of security in their products that they're utilizing in their home. So NIST here through this program is touching cybersecurity on a variety of levels, and these guidances, I'm sure you're all aware of, you're all familiar with, have been widely used throughout industry and throughout government. Then again, I'm going to go through these kind of quicker. I'm sorry. You all are probably familiar with the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, or the NCCOE, which is kind of a collaborative hub between private industry and NIST and government and academia, where we can start, developing smaller projects to help transition ideas from theory to practical application with respect to cybersecurity. And IoT has been a huge use case within that. I know we've worked with NCCOE to work on how we can unify kind of user identification for public safety devices and things like that, so that we can come up with a secure, identifiable, centralized practice to authenticate public safety users on different systems. So there's a lot of public-private collaboration here as well. This is kind of an ongoing theme with NIST, is trying to get these applications commercial, to get them trusted, to get them out there, and to ensure that we have like a safe, economy for IoT technologies. And then the last two are the Global City Teams Challenge, which a lot of you might be familiar with this working group's emphasis on smart communities. And basically, this is just working as another public-private partnership between smart city and IoT stakeholders to develop and deploy standards-based solutions that are interoperable, that are scalable, and that provide benefit to the communities that are utilizing them. So, determining where the most effective applications of IoT technologies and IoT applications are. And they've developed a couple of frameworks, the IoT-enabled smart cities framework, as well as the municipal IoT blueprint. And they kind of provide tools for cities that are hoping to implement IoT solutions that kind of lower interoperability barriers and lead to faster implementation of smart city projects. Man, there are a lot of them. And then we have the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education, which provides kind of a it's tangential to IoT. It's not specific to IoT, but it provides an idea of the type of workforce needed for cybersecurity knowledge when you're developing or deploying a system such as an IoT system. So it allows end users to understand the security part of the IoT business case, to understand who they need to employ to ensure that they maintain a secure network, and to increase the efficiency of training and getting the appropriate individuals onboarded. And finally, we have the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, which is a group that is basically was formed to enhance the competitiveness of the US manufacturing industry. And they have started doing a lot of work with IoT systems, because a lot of manufacturing, did the initial implementation of these automated control systems back before IoT was even a thing. And now, these outdated systems are in some cases needing to be updated and enhanced to incorporate IoT elements. So MEP is doing a lot of work there. They're doing a lot of work with workforce training and also cybersecurity. So as you can see, NIST is kind of exploring IoT through a lot of their projects. I mean, as I'm sure many of you are, IoT has become this foundational element to a lot of the work that we're all doing, because it provides the data that we need to perform a lot of these advanced operations with AI analytics and other things. So onto the topic that I thought our groups could kind of collaborate on. NIST was also tasked with implementing a federal working group and a corresponding Internet of Things advisory board back in the fiscal year 2021. It was part of the DIGIT Act, the Developing Innovation and Growing the Internet of Things Act, that was drafted by Senators Fisher, Schatz, Gardner, and Booker in 2017. So this has been around a long while. And it proposed both building a federal working group of members within the federal government and an associated steering committee comprised of members outside of the federal government. And it addressed the need for the US government to encourage and plan for the proliferation of IoT devices that were coming to the network. How can the US government remove barriers, whether barriers that have been created by regulations or otherwise, to kind of enable the enhancement of IoT deployment? And how can we develop a strategic plan for IoT? So it covers a lot of ground. Right now, we have been working with the federal working group, I believe, since the beginning of this year. We have about 15 agencies participating, including Danielle, who has been participating on behalf of GSA, which we appreciate, as well as Michael Burkholt, who I believe is a part of this group and introduced me to Don and everyone here. So I appreciate that. The members of this group have currently been going through the duties that were outlined by the DIGIT Act, which was eventually published in the NDAA for fiscal year 2021. And basically, we are considering IoT at every level of the government, both the regulations or different practices that provide funding to enable IoT development. We have to consider the policies or regulations that might be inhibiting the deployment of IoT. We also have to look at security as well as critical infrastructure and how that's being secured, how government entities can coordinate better to enhance the deployment of IoT. And then we also have to work to consider the recommendations of the steering committee that's referenced here in section C. And NIST decided early on that the steering committee referenced in the legislation would be a part of the Federal Advisory Committee Act, or a FACA. So once something is designated a FACA, it takes a lot of time to get everything situated and the public properly notified. So we are coming to the final stages of notifying the members for the FACA. We have the last set of documentation that needs to go out, should be going out shortly. It will consist of 16 members from private industry, all representing a different sector of interest defined by the legislation. The FACA meetings will all be open to the public. There will be a Federal Register notice posted for every meeting and a website where you can register and attend. The Federal Working Group will be responsible for responding to all recommendations made by the FACA in the final report that we will be providing to Congress. We will have 6 months after the FACA provides their report to provide our final report and responses to their recommendations. So there's a lot of work that is upcoming for this federal working group. Our final report will be submitted to Congress and will include things like factors that will inhibit the development and deployment of Internet of Things, policies or programs that could improve the US adoption of IoT technologies, as well as how we can coordinate better between relevant federal agencies. And then talk about the current and future use of IoT within the federal government and how it can be used more securely, and responses from the IoT Advisory Board, or the FACA. So we are about to encounter a lot of work with responding to the FACA and trying to really gather this information between the agencies better. And we have some definite obstacles to overcome just in writing this report. One of the things that we're encountering is that we're trying to find issues throughout the IoT lifecycle, not only the components themselves or the hardware objects, but also the network capabilities, spectrum availability, whether it's rural or urban, as well as the data-driven aspects that may be inhibiting IoT adoption, whether data is accessible, whether it's able to be shared amongst participants, things like that. We're definitely encountering issues in that IoT is seen differently depending on the agency or sector or department. We were having some discussions internally. Some people are starting to define the electric vehicle charging stations as IoT, which makes sense because they are connected to the internet and they do, have data that is sent between the traffic, but they aren't traditionally seen as traditional kind of IoT objects. So just kind of, trying to get that information to the various participants of the federal working group and ensure that we're all looking at the same scope has been very hard. An additional barrier that we have is identifying barriers that are relevant to one's own agency is difficult just because of the scope. We typically have 1 or 2 members representing an entire department, 1 member or 2 members representing Department of Energy, representing Department of Transportation. And the amount of work that's being done in the various areas is very hard to capture, just because the perspective is so limited. So one of the things we're looking for is kind of external perspectives for those of you in private industry or different areas of the agencies that we're working with that have a perspective as to barriers that you are encountering when it comes to IoT adoption, or barriers that the private sector is encountering due to regulations. We've heard of regulations regarding drone usage that can make it very hard to operate in certain situations with respects to agriculture, for example. What are the barriers, if any, to adopting IoT? And it could be, lack of standards, lack of guidance, regulation, legal issues as well. And then finally, we're looking for any recommendations that the federal government can take to catalyze adoption or remove barriers. We've gotten the give private sector more money feedback already, but we're, coming at it from different perspectives, I think, is the way that we're going to need to address it. And we were kind of hoping, because the, ACT, IAC, or IAC, ACT, I'm sorry, I have it backwards, it's not on my screen, is working in kind of the same space. I was hoping there would be some collaborative efforts that we could really undertake to kind of get a better sense for how the private industry is affected by, current IoT implementations. So if
Quick question, Alison.
Sure.
You talked a good bit about some of the barriers and really the enablers of the business cases and the economics are kind of offsetting some of those things. Is there a lot of focus on kind of this makes so much economic sense that, it becomes a priority, or, this has such a great business case, we're going to corral the agencies toward a movement forward?
Yeah, that's a really good point. There has not been a lot of economic focus currently. We've been focused a lot on just kind of the regulations and the programs that different federal agencies have been operating under. And I really think that the economic perspective is where the private sector perspective is really going to come into play. And so we're hoping to get some people to come talk to the federal working group to kind of make that case, because right now we don't have a good perspective of implementation operations and what would be the most beneficial direction for implementation to take. I hope that answered your question.
It did. I appreciate that. Thank you.
And so that really wrapped up my presentation. I just wanted to end with our contact information. We meet monthly. And if anyone would like to participate in the federal working group or give like a 20-minute presentation on perspectives that may help, and also if you'd like to attend the BACA meetings once they start, just please reach out to Kat or myself, and we can provide some feedback and some give you kind of a platform to talk about those things. So at this time, once again, I didn't get too much into the standards. Well, NIST really doesn't develop standards, but a little bit into the best practices that we're trying to develop. And we can answer any questions that y'all might have.
This was amazing, Alison. Great information. Earlier in the slides, you had a slide that talked about a connection with some of the smart city initiatives that are taking place. And, as you mentioned, that's one of the domain areas that this group is interested in. Is there a separate set of contacts, or, if we contact you, you can guide us toward those other resources or other working groups?
Absolutely. I don't know if you've talked to Michael Dunaway from NIST. He recently took over the Global Cities Teams Challenge from Sukwu Ri, who had headed it up for probably since its inception. But he would probably be the best person to reach out to regarding the smart cities connections. And then the smart connected systems division also has a lot of work just in general, like kind of Michael's more of the practical application, and then the smart connected systems does a lot of like frameworks and kind of best practices that they're developing for these cyber physical systems, IoT systems.
Perfect. Thank you.
But yeah, if you get in touch with me, I can definitely introduce you.
Great. Any questions or comments people would like to share or ask Alison while we have this phenomenal, knowledgeable resource with us?
Yeah, I'll say one thing if I can. I put the note in the chat window, but from my experience, I kind of find myself wondering if this whole IoT space isn't going to end up, and maybe we're already there, is what I would call a perfect storm. It's almost too big to deal with. And,
Yeah.
At what point is doing more of what we've always done, hopefully better, but is that not going to actually get us somewhere as needed as compared to some, more revolutionary approach? I don't want to point back to just the Microsoft, Apple sort of history and all that, but I just worry that we're going to end up, in essence, locked up with all sorts of massively interesting ideas, but it's like a 5,000 page cookbook. How do you use it?
Yeah, I've been working in IoT for a long time, and I came from, standard telecommunications. So everything was really dictated by 3GPP, and it's good to have these international standards. So coming into IoT, it's like, it's like the Wild West. Everybody's kind of doing their own thing. And we're starting to see emergences of like the major players and the de facto standards kind of being developed there, yeah, it's really hard I know NIST has some presence on some bodies kind of looking at various IoT standards, but it's like, yeah, I totally agree with that sentiment. It's really hard at this point to kind of determine how we're gonna play together nicely. I'm interested to hear like what your working group has kind of discussed, especially in the smart communities space, because that's just kind of like the end game, trying to get all of these systems in all of these sectors functioning together, and how's that working?
Well, as you mentioned Michael Burkhouse, who's a critical member and co-lead of the group along with Pete Saronis. And really hats off to Mike for kind of connecting you with us for this session. Pete had a session last month with Coley from the agricultural segment, where he talked about some public health. So we are recording these sessions, cataloging them, making them available to people as their thoughts or research would be helpful. Other questions? I see, Michael, you're ready to speak.
Yes, this is Michael Novak. Thank you, Alison, very much for presenting on this. This is great. It's exciting, but it's also very daunting. I'm on the private sector side, and I work with a variety of different emerging technologies, and some of the things you spoke about regarding that cooperation is difficult, as you know, because different agencies define IoT differently. Are we talking about medical IoT? Are we talking about industrial IoT? Are we talking about consumer IoT? And then even within them, it's unwrapping the wrapper of the wrapper. So I'm just curious, have you had more luck, or who's your favorite agency, or back up from a standards perspective? I won't put you on the spot with that, but from the meetings perspective, have you developed uniform definitions of what IoT means to the working group?
I felt like we did early on, and as we start getting the reports out, I'm still finding that there's, differences. Like we had one agency, we're kind of presenting on our individual perspective projects trying to enhance IoT, and we had one agency, trying to think if I can say, it was the FDA. They were like, we don't really define anything as IoT, and it's like, you don't. When it's like medical devices, and they're like, we're not quite there yet. And it's, so it's like, because we were thinking, you've got all this stuff, and it's like, yeah, we haven't come to that definition yet. That's not how our operations go. So it's just like all these things that you think would be there. And like the Department of Transportation and the electric vehicle chargers, just there's all these things that could be, but you can't, like, as the federal government, define it just yet. You've got to get stuff in place so that you have the correct definition for your agency, and it's not going to be the same as the other agency. So yeah, the collaborative aspect and just how we're going to interconnect, it's going to, going back to what Scott said, it's almost like, too late to come up with a unified definition that functions for everybody, or nobody's trying to. So we're kind of just here we are,
Yeah,
so.
no, and I would agree. I mean, that's been part of the difficulty I've seen and experienced. I'm currently been focused on conversational voice AI.
Mhm.
And that's probably one of the top 3 questions I get asked is, oh yeah, I've got a smart speaker at home. Wait a minute, is that an IoT device? That's like, well, and so currently my 2-second perspective is, does it have a speaker? Does it have a microphone? Yes. And then the key question is to make sure it's not telephony. Is it human to machine? If it's human to human, that's telephony, that's cellular and landline, not us.
Mhm.
But if there's that intelligence, that machine learning component, then at least as a candidate to be considered a conversational voice AI device.
Mhm.
But then the next question is, okay, now in an IoT perspective, what's not an IoT? Is a light switch an IoT device? Maybe, if it does have some intelligence, So again,
Mhm.
that's why I bring that up, because you're right. I can't say it's too late. It's necessary to come up even with a generic definition to start that may be too broad,
Mhm.
because you have to start somewhere, and that
Yeah.
will help drive the policy. And then as you encounter things that fit or don't fit, that's when you're able to say, okay, we're going to modify that definition to account for the metaverse, to account for a smart fork, or something that comes out in
Yeah.
the future.
Well, and that's the other point that you bring up, is just that the technologies that are utilizing IoT devices are evolving so quickly. It's like that kind of has a bearing on how you define it as well. It's like, we're all going into the metaverse, I guess, and how how does that define, the information that's being produced to populate that universe? How does that impact the definition itself? There's a lot of
And then there's the
variables.
embedded side of the world as well. I have an automobile. Okay. So it has a smart sensor on the tire. Is that IoT? The engine has a sensor, so this is where, to me, I come to your group and I say, this is why not an absolute standard, but a standard, attack a use case, define it. It's not going to solve the world, but start here.
Yeah.
And then, find that one, get successful, and then take it somewhere else. So yeah, I would love to follow up with you.
Oh yeah, definitely. We would.
I might have an opinion or two and some experience in this space, and in the smart cities specifically, because that's huge. Sorry, Don.
I gotta say, I thought of you. I was watching Hocus Pocus 2, which is kind of an interesting movie from my perspective. Everybody, you can like it, you can hate it, but there is a little scene in there where there's a smart speaker device that the witches are somewhat confused with. So, the cultural acceptance of talking to things instead of typing on things
Aren't we
know,
doing
those-
that right now,
those-
Don? We're talking on Zoom. Is this not, is this magic?
Exactly. And, back to kind of help Allison with the question, how does this overlay to some of the Act-IAC activities? As I'd mentioned to you, we have 5 working groups. We have 3 that are probably, kind of joined at the hip, the artificial intelligence working group, the blockchain working group, and this working group, along with DevOps and intelligence automation, which, really the intelligent automation is, a sensor told me this, I'm going to react to it in this way. And so really those are the areas where we have active Act-IAC working groups that are, wrestling with some of the similar issues to what your group is. I also, Narendra is got a lot of expertise. He was a little bit modest about himself in the introduction. He leads IEEE Smart Community Working Group, and I don't want to put you on the spot, Narendra, but can you share a little bit about your perspective if you're able to?
Sure, I would be glad to, Don. Thank you. So what Don is referring to is we are working on the IEEE P1950.1 Smart Cities framework for standards development. And our approach is actually taking into all the different accounts. So for example, while we have to be limited in our scope for the framework, but there are a lot of different areas that we can easily tap into. So for example, IoT, if we're looking deeper into any particular ecosystem, and you just pick one, whether it's healthcare, agriculture, transportation, and so on, there is the matter of the sensors, the capabilities, and how do we communicate information back and forth? And is there any kind of standardization for it to distinguish between one manufacturer or vendor from another? And is there room for standardization there? And how do we go about getting that? And if you were to look at it from a bigger picture point of view and looking to see how those particular sensors or devices that we're looking at fit into the larger ecosystem, whether we're sticking with transportation or healthcare or across different ecosystems, such as a city environment. So there are obviously going to be a relationship, and probably the most common example that we've used in the group is, if you have a vehicle that requires electrical charging, how do you keep track of how many vehicles there are, and how does that impact the electric grid? And do we need to take that into account? What are the relationships? So there's a lot of discussions that basically needs to be had on this, and a lot of issues that we need to tackle. But those are some of the areas we're working on in the Smart Cities group. And just one additional comment as far as the way we are characterizing our approach is really looking at it from an ecosystem point of view, where we're looking at really more about the demand for different types of services and how it fits into a particular larger ecosystem. The second area is really more about networks, technologies, and enablers. And this really provides more capabilities of how to be able to address those needs. And the third area is governance, and that we've broken up into strategic, tactical, and operations areas. And that's pretty much the high-level view of Smart Cities.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
I did want to mention Sam Nararo has joined the group as our government sponsor. And so he's, going to bring a fresh perspective, some new ideas. Danielle, you're in the GSA agency as well and have been, working with the group for a number of years. Any thoughts or any things you'd like to share?
Well, first of all, this has been great, so thank you, Allison, for participating in this. And I'm thrilled that, there's an intersection now, connectivity between Act-IAC and what you're doing with NIST. You summarized a lot of the big challenges. You talked about definition, and that's kind of come full circle almost. I remember some of the earlier discussions about, we were enthusiastic about getting maybe a common definition, but now we're realizing, the scope of this is so much bigger and it's a much more challenging activity to try and define this. But
Mhm.
but the good news is that, we're actually, we're articulating the challenge and getting that definition. And I appreciate what, I'm not sure if it was Michael or someone that said, well, start with a definition and maybe it's too broad, but then we have a point of departure from there that we, can hone. And then the progression has been, examining these different individual use cases, whether it's agriculture or it's health, and we're getting a deeper understanding that fidelity in those individual sectors. And, some of the description I heard today was, Allison, I think you said kind of the smart cities is almost like the end state, when everything is connected. And especially from your point of view in public safety, that's really like a very important use case where you're connecting from the devices identification, the data where it needs to go, connecting it to, a zillion different databases. You're talking about identifying populations, geolocation, and bringing resources to bear, and, dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands in cases of major events to bring all that together coherently. So from my perspective, just seeing that progression, and then, just understanding that this is a big space. It's good to hear that finally moving on to the steering group. So that'll offer, I'm hoping that's going to offer a lot of perspective, because we have industry perspective on this call today. And then, I would just, just be really thrilled to see this continued participation, this, cooperation between you, Allison, in particular, but NIST, ACT-IAC. I mean, there are resources on the ACT-IAC side. Don mentioned a few of those, the working groups, but we have conferences and maybe do some collaborative work about addressing the challenges. What is IoT? We don't have a perfect definition, but, begin to understand, help industry, help government, Fed, state, local, begin to have that conversation. So I'll stop with that. But again, thank you so much, Allison. This has been really, really helpful.
Thank you, Danielle. I see, Scott, you had some insightful comments on the chat. You have your hand up, so I assume you're ready to speak.
Yeah, the two things I wanted to mention, I had to smile when Michael talked about, a sensor in a tire. I was at the Intelligent Transportation Systems event in Los Angeles a couple of weeks ago, and two of the biggest industry presences there were Michelin and Continental. So yes, they are already in this smart device connectivity sort of world or whatever. And so, it just shows you how quickly all this is happening, regardless of all these things we're talking about doing. The second thing that just seems to me to be likely is, I think everybody has enough sense, we have enough sense technically and all the rest of it around questions of 5G or 6G or anything else. We know how to try and think about all that in these IoT discussions. But I don't know that we're at the same place in really understanding what I would call, sort of classic centralized cloud versus computation at the edge and processing at the edge, and how that architecturally may drive some things that we're doing. And maybe some thinking and consideration of that question is even more important for us than 5G, 6G, all the stuff that you see talked about more frequently.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We've been, talking a lot about that as you start looking at like the public safety systems, how much goes to the, even the distribution of like 5G itself, and how they're moving the resources of the network components to the edge so that the backhaul just from there is reduced. And yeah, I think that's been coming up again and again and again for me. So yeah, I think that's a big component that needs to be addressed, not just the systems, but like the network capabilities and where the actual processing, computation, and storage happens.
So has that been addressed though? I mean, have you done anything in the meetings so far to try and again, put parameters around, okay, an IoT capability is this, this, and this, and not that, or, you know, again, processing power, is it strong enough to cache data? Does it, you know, because I mean, that's my perspective, that you need to come up with not a standard, but just an agreement that when we say IoT, it has these 4 capabilities and et cetera.
Yeah, for the purposes of this group, I think there was no intention of putting that level of capability on it. And like the broadness that they're looking for, it's both beneficial and a hindrance, because it's just kind of like drinking from the fire hose. And I think at some part of the report needs to contain that, because I think when the legislation was developed, they were looking for some kind of a strategic plan, and you can't have any kind of planning without that. So what things are shaping up to be right now, and I reserve the right to change that later, is, you know, we're going to have some like global look of what's right now, and then start drilling down into things like what you're talking about. It's like, we really need to define it, and it needs to take into account this, this, and this. We need to think about this. And with this definition, we can start thinking about a strategic plan and, you know, seeing how the agencies interact, because like right now, like I'm saying, they all have different definitions of what they consider to be a system. So I think, yeah, the report's going to contain a lot of information.
Once again, thank you, Allison. Let me go ahead and wrap up. Our next meeting is November 3rd. We're looking forward to hearing more from Narendra, who's going to share with us some of his IEEE efforts and things he's doing in the smart community, smart city world. So once again, a big thank you to all, especially you, Allison, for the preparation and great information you shared with us. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.